Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Seaman. I am the editor for Job Seekers and Get Hired at LinkedIn News. Welcome to Get Hired Live, a show dedicated to talking about job searching during these challenging times. I'm so happy that you're joining us today. And as always, I would like you to begin by introducing yourselves in the chat stream. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your job search. What are you looking for? Where are you looking? Are you looking to move into a new industry? And then connect with people who are also in the stream. So maybe you see someone from your area, maybe you see someone who wants to be in the industry you're in, or you want to be in the industry that they're in. Make connections, help each other out, review resumes, share contacts. Some of the best notes that I get are when people connect over these discussions and also help each other out. So be sure to do that. As always, I have a guest with me today, and I'm very excited to bring him on. Vincent Phamvan is the founder of Viton Career Coaching. And I'm so happy that he's here. A lot of you probably know him from the Hope Summit, which was this massive career search and job search summit that was held in May. And you had so many attendees, so many great speakers. So thank you for all you do. Welcome, Vincent.
Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for having us. And thank you for helping with Hope Summit. You know, it was so incredible during these times, the power of community. And I think this is like literally the best of LinkedIn is when communities come together to be able to support each other. And it was awesome having you kick off the first session at the Hope Summit.
Definitely, and thank you so much for having me. And talking about community, we have so many people joining us today. We have Alexis from Houston, Malcolm from North Carolina, Kevin from Las Vegas, Muna from Florida, and Chris from Los Angeles. Thank you all and welcome. Sorry for the noise. I live in New York City, so there's no controlling that. But thank you all for joining us. And like I said, please introduce yourself into the comments. And Vincent, how about we start with some of the questions that were pre-submitted?
Sure.
First, I want to, as always, tell people one of the things to keep in mind is that I edit some of the questions to make them as broadly applicable as possible. That way, as many people can get as much out of your questions as possible. So one thing that's definitely come in recently is how do people network during these challenging times? Because you can't obviously have coffee with people, you can't go to their offices, meet or hang out. What is the way to network right now, Vincent?
Yeah. I mean, networking at its core is just building relationships with other people. It's getting to know other people. It's helping other people. And all that has changed right now is that there's other forums, there's other channels. And so taking advantage of places like LinkedIn and really doubling down there, you can still grab coffee with other people. I had coffee with somebody last week, but we jumped on a video call similar to this. And, we each brought our own coffee. So I think now is the time to really be able to lean in on those types of activities. The reality is that when you're grabbing coffee with somebody in person, you have to take time to drive there, get in a car, find parking, walk there, take a subway there. And now it's actually even more convenient because a 15-minute coffee literally takes 16 or 17 minutes from end to end. And so it's still a great way of being able to network and meet with others. The other big thing too is many of the industry conferences, trade shows, everything has moved to virtual summits. And so, you talked about Hope Summit as being one example, but many of those types of what used to be physical events have moved to in person, and almost every single one of them has some form of networking component as part of it too.
Definitely. And I think one thing to stress too is when people talk about networking, a lot of times they think that it's some sort of weird, gimmicky thing that you do over awkward happy hours. But really, networking is about building relationships and being genuine. And it's a
Mhm.
cornerstone to job searching. So, when you think of a job search, you think of a resume, you think of your online presence, but really networking is probably just as big of a part of that. So people, they sometimes shy away from it and it's the last thing from their mind, but it's so important. So thank you so much for addressing that.
Yeah, I couldn't
And
agree with you more.
yeah, and we have a question in the stream from Eric who says that he's looking to make a dynamic career shift at the age of 50. Um, Obviously, it's a scary time to do that. He's graduating with a double business major in business administration and HR management this fall. He wants to go from being a warehouse worker to HR. Any suggestions for doing a career change like that?
Yeah, Eric, first off, I want to say kudos, right? Being able to have that growth mindset where you're focused on learning every single day, investing in yourself every single day is really what allows you to be able to make these types of large changes. HR is a great place to be able to jump in. With that degree, I would be open minded about the type of role in HR that you choose to jump into. And I started out my career, one of my earliest positions was actually a recruiting coordinator role at a Fortune 100 company. It wasn't something where I had specific HR experience before jumping into it, but at its core, realize and understand what's made you successful in the past and the things that you're passionate about, which could be talking to other people, helping other people, the level of organization that you've brought to all areas of your life, and be ready to be able to show how those traits made you successful in the past and how you're looking forward to applying that to the next role that you're applying for. But all of those life experiences set you up to be even in a stronger position to be able to grab that role.
I think that's fantastic advice, and I think a lot of what job searching is storytelling. It's about sort of knowing where you've come from and what you've learned
Mhm.
from that, and how that will propel you in your future. So I think that's fantastic advice. And actually, along those lines, we have another question here from Kathy. How do you overcome not having all skills required for the job? And I think a lot of people, especially who are thinking of career changes, fall into this category of, what do I do if it says that I need X, Y, and Z, but I only have X and Y?
Yeah, that's a great point. If you need X, Y, and Z and you only have X and Y, you should still apply for the role. It's funny that you use three letters there because I typically tell people if you see about two-thirds of the job description that you do meet that job description, you should apply. And so that's something to definitely know. Be very cognizant of the fact of how your skills transfer. And there's a lot of intangible skills that employers are looking for because at the end of the day, they're going to receive a lot of resumes that are similar. I've interviewed hundreds of candidates. I've hired hundreds of folks as a hiring manager, but I've also screened thousands of candidates as a recruiter in the past. And some of the things that I've seen are the things that make you stand out are your passion and your energy for your work. And regardless of whether you're transferring roles, pivoting industries right now, all of that is going to follow you. And so, if you're focused on learning agility, you can show that even if you don't have specific experiences in that specific role or in that specific industry, you can give examples of times in the past where you've learned something quickly and have applied those skills quickly that have resulted in some type of quantifiable success. And Andrew just mentioned talking about stories and telling stories. If you bring this to life in a story, you're going to be irresistible to a company that's looking for talented people. The reality is you can't train attitude. Attitude is something that you just have, but job skills, specific job skills can definitely be learned and companies know that. The obvious exception to this is for roles that require specific licensing or specific certifications or specific degrees. These might be in like a healthcare or a legal field. However, outside of that, for most job descriptions, employers have it as a wish list of their ideal candidate. And if you feel like you meet most of those requirements, you have nothing to lose by going after that role.
I think that's great advice. And also, attitude is key. And, growing up, my parents always said I had too much attitude, and I know they're watching. So I just wanted to give that a shout out. But attitude is key because it's one of those things where if you go into any situation thinking that you're going to fail or anything like that, it's going to end up, sort of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then also, we're talking about skills, and the people who've watched this show before probably are sick of hearing me say it, but I always suggest people think of their skills as sort of themselves as a basket of skills. So, even though I'm a journalist, I know how to write, I can do some video, I can do all these other little things. So even if I wasn't a journalist anymore, I can go somewhere else and say, hey, I have all these things in my basket. What can I use them for? So that's something that I always think can be a little bit helpful. And
Yeah, and that's
go
so
ahead.
true, Andrew. Like you take a look at your skill set, right? Like I've had a few interactions with you over the times, and you're incredible at connecting with people. You're incredible at getting to know and understand other people, and you're incredible at telling stories. And when you take those passions and those skills, you can transfer that over into public relations. You can transfer that into brand marketing. There's so many different places where those skills can be applied, but what is at its core is what you're passionate about. But your job role doesn't necessarily define you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, and obviously you're fantastic at connecting people too. Otherwise, Hope Summit would have received so many so many attendees. And our next question that I want to talk about is from Jasper, and it's how do you follow up with someone whom you've invited to connect? They either never read your message or maybe they read it and didn't respond. I think this is something a lot of job seekers face, is sort of that lack of response. How should
Mhm.
people follow up, and what is that dance like with recruiters or hiring managers maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think the first thing to acknowledge is these are not normal times. These are really odd times that we're living in right now. I have a text message that I owe a response to one of my siblings, and it's obviously somebody who I love, and yet I still owe them a response. So I think the first one right now is being understanding and understanding that you have no idea likely what is going on in somebody else's life. With that being said, it's very important to follow up. This is where you really take control of your own destiny into your own hands. Obviously, there's a reasonable amount of time to be able to follow up, but short, brief follow ups are absolutely okay. I would say in your messages, as you're reaching out to other people, really focus on how you can focus on helping other people. The world ends up being a really great place when we serve each other and we focus on supporting and helping others. And the reality is, in life, in the world that we live in, reciprocity is a very real thing, and it'll come full circle if you focus on helping other people.
I think that's great advice. And one thing that sticks with me is when I talk to Sarah Johnston, who's also a job search expert, she talks about having grace. And I think having grace during this period is very important because, there's so many people out of work, tens of millions in the United States alone. And if you're a recruiter or hiring manager, you're being inundated by so many messages, and it just is almost impossible to keep up. So you have to prioritize. So I think what's key too is just don't take that lack of response personally. A lot of
Mhm.
times it's just that person on the other end doesn't have the time in their day to actually respond to all the messages. So I think that's
Yeah,
important.
that's spot on. Sarah Johnson, I just got a private message from her on LinkedIn, and she's incredible. Talk about a person that really focuses on helping others. And Andrew, you just said something there that I really want to call out, which is when you're connecting with somebody else, just write a brief 1 to 2 sentences to personalize that message. I think my LinkedIn profile is up on here. If you're connecting with me, if you're connecting with Andrew, if you're connecting with Sarah, who was just mentioned, just a short little message there goes a long way when you're reaching out to somebody to increase the chances that you're going to get an accepted connection as well as a response.
Yes, and actually, when I was a beat reporter several years ago, it was funny because there was some PR people that were just fantastic reaching out to me. And the one time I was at a conference, and all these PR people said, "Why is it that they can get to you and that that I can't get to you?" And I always said, "Well, they send me 3 lines of text. You send me like 7,000 words." So brevity is very important sometimes. And then, moving on to the next question, we have a great follow up here from Sushi, I believe. Sorry, I'm trying. There's so many comments. It's wonderful to see. What is the best method to get a recruiter's attention? I think that's a great follow up. Is how do you actually get these people to notice you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I actually recorded a podcast episode yesterday with a recruiter from Tesla, and that was actually one of the exact questions that I shared. So the podcast episode will be coming out soon. But let me give you a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a preview about some of the things that came out. The first one is understand if that recruiter recruits for the types of roles that you're looking for, meaning that at large companies, recruiters are often either recruiting for sales positions or they're recruiting for marketing positions or they're recruiting for HR positions. A big difference is recruiters who are recruiting for technical roles versus non-technical roles. There's usually little hints on the recruiter's LinkedIn profile as to the types of roles that they recruit for. The next thing that I would say is when you for all of you, think about the times that you post a message, whether that's on LinkedIn, whether it's on another social media platform, and somebody hits like on that message or somebody comments on your message. Like, doesn't that make you feel good? Like, I know for me, I just get like this burst of adrenaline. If you're like that too, just type the word yes into the chat right now because I can't be the only one. This is a very real thing for recruiters when they're posting messages on LinkedIn, talking about what the company's doing, talking about how they're giving back. Like those posts, comment on those posts. Oftentimes, many of those posts only have 3, 4, 5, less than 10 comments or likes on the post. And so it's definitely going to make you stand out. But this is how relationships are built. When you're engaging with a recruiter and you're adding to a conversation versus the message that many times recruiters often get is just a simple message that says, "Hi, can you take a look at my profile and let me know if there's a job that might be good for me." That's a very self-serving message. But when one thing that I've said over and over again, focus on helping other people and focus on making the conversation really about them. And so when you're engaging with that recruiter through their comments, once you send that connection request later, once you send that private message to them later, they're already going to recognize in their head, oh yeah, that was the person
Mhm.
that left me that comment.
Fantastic, advice. I think, and I think that's one of the things people struggle with most. And for those of you just joining us, I know we have so many people watching. This is Get Hired Live. I'm Andrew Seaman from LinkedIn News, and I'm chatting with the founder of Viton Career Coaching, Vincent Phamvan. So, if you have questions, get them in the stream. We're taking them now. And, moving on to the next question, it's this is something that comes up quite a bit, and this is from Adrian. How can I get companies to look at my experience over the fact that I don't have a bachelor's degree? Some companies do not care about only having associate's degrees.
I think this varies very differently by industry as well as by company. So one of the best things that I would suggest is do your homework. Take a look at other companies. The beauty of LinkedIn as a platform is you can see other employees who work at other companies in similar roles as the role that you're interested in. So if, for instance, you're looking at, I'm going to use an example, operations manager positions at a specific company, you can go on LinkedIn, do a quick search for that company, filter down by operations manager as a title, and then just look at, 10 to 20 people who are in that role nationally and take a look at whether they have bachelor's degrees. If you see that maybe a third of them, maybe 20% of them don't have bachelor's degrees, then that gives you a sense of what the culture is like inside of that company, where they might value experiences, relevant experiences, just as much as bachelor's degrees. And that tells you it's a company that you should put your time and energy and focus on. If on the opposite side of that, you see that 100% of the people in those operations managers roles have bachelor's degrees, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be impossible for you to get that role, but your effort and energy might be spent on a different company that catches your eye, where you see that the culture is a little bit different.
Fantastic. And I think that's where sort of the companies themselves come into play. A lot of people will say, I want to move into this industry or that industry, but there's so much variability within industries that's important to pay attention to. And you mentioned culture, and I want to get back to that because Rebecca and Kathleen, and I think this is what a lot of people are thinking about right now. I'm hoping for a culture that values people first. How can I
Mhm.
assess a company for that? So basically, how do you tell what a company is like on the inside instead of just, the great promotional photos that they put out?
Yeah. That's I think a really great point. Every company puts a lot of work into whether it's their company profile on their LinkedIn company page or whether it's their career website. But that is the public facing version of that company. One of the best ways to get to know companies is to talk to people who work at those companies. They'll all have stories to be able to tell. For instance, one of my former employers, I worked for a company that was called Assurian. They're based in Nashville. It's a global company, has thousands of employees. And, when the hurricanes hit in Houston, some of the things that we saw were the company sent employees to Houston to help employees whose homes were impacted tear down drywall and rebuild. They were shipping pallets of supplies to employees that have been impacted by natural disasters. And recently, they sent masks and gloves and hand sanitizer out to teams globally. These are the types of stories that you hear people tell, employees tell when they're proud to work at an organization. And these are some of the best ways of being able to understand the companies. And I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on right now more than ever. I think it says a lot if a company puts out a public statement supporting minority groups, supporting um, different groups, whether that's Pride, whether it's supporting the Black Lives Matters movement. These are the types of things that become increasingly important. You spend a lot of time at work and you're going to surround yourself with a lot of people who are going to become your family. It's really important to be able to understand whether your personal values align with an organization that you're about to join.
I think that's great advice. And I think something else that's important to keep in mind is that this is where networking can also come into play, is because if you have someone on the inside or you reach out to someone, this is a valid talking point and it's not too big of an ask. A lot of people, when they network, they'll always start off with, I don't know you, but can you get me a job? And that's
Mhm.
terrible. But if you ask them, hey, listen, I'm thinking of applying to this job. I'm not asking for anything along those lines, but I want to know what the culture of your company is like. So beyond the statements, beyond those pictures, you can just say, listen, what do they do? What are the programs? Can you tell me a little bit about what's happening inside the company, just to give me some information on whether I want to invest my time there? So that's also where networking can come into play. And
Absolutely.
our next question, we have a lot of people sort of asking similar questions. So Aditya and Kayla are both recent grads. They want to know how to navigate their job search in this environment. And I think there's a lot of people in that boat.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something you mentioned, Sarah, earlier. Something that Sarah Johnson and I both have in common is that we graduated during a recession, during the last recession specifically. And we started and kicked off job searches during that recession. The first thing is that uncertainty is tough. I know for me, I would rather get bad news and then move on than to have uncertainty in time frame. And unfortunately, that's the world that we're living in right now. The economy is starting to pick back up. We're seeing companies start and resume hiring. Folks that I work with to help them in their job search, job offers are coming in. At the same time, we saw a jobs report with 1.5 million people filing for unemployment, and companies, unfortunately, are still impacting employees and laying off employees as they're figuring out what their futures look like as well. So, a couple pieces of specific advice. You are not defined by your current circumstance, meaning that what you are doing right now, your last job interview, your current job, your next job that you're going to be in, does not define your character, your personality, and you as a human being. So think back to all that you've accomplished in the past. Think back to what got you into that college in the first place. You're still the same person. That's still you. Over the course of the next few years, and when you read about what happened to the class of 2009, everybody made it. It might have taken a little bit of time and it might have taken a different path, but doctors still became doctors, lawyers still became lawyers, business folks still became business folks. They just took a slightly different path. And so these are the types of things to keep in mind. There's some things that you can do in the short term, though. Be open minded about your next immediate moves. For me, I ended up taking a role in a retail job. And 5 years later, that ended up being a really great move for me. I met the people that enabled me to be able to take the next steps in my career from that experience. And so, even though that wasn't what I had planned on doing, that path ended up allowing me to expand my network. And you've heard Andrew talk about the importance of networking and how that just unlocks doors for you in the future. The second one is continue learning. Even though you're graduating now, continue focusing on learning. And what I love is that with the internet now, you have LinkedIn Learning, you have other areas where you keep learning, and not all of this costs money to be able to do. And so you can keep focusing on your development, whether that's learning how to use Excel, whether that's learning how to use Google Sheets, whether it's learning how to use Photoshop, and all of these skills will continue to get you ready for your next adventure.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I remember seeing that comment about, your background, so I appreciate you sharing that. And on the other side of the spectrum, we were talking about recent grads. We have a lot of people who are concerned about ageism. Maybe they've been laid off for the first time, and they were in higher ranking positions,
Hmm.
or this is, they went from having a very good job market to having
Hmm.
a very rough job market. What should people who are in their 50s, 60s, and older do? Is there anything they can do about sort of fighting ageism within the job search process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if anything, there's certain advantages that that job seeker might have over other job seekers. So, we've talked about networking a bit on this session, but if you're listening right now, type into the chat what percentage of jobs you think are found through networking. There's a lot of different ways to apply for jobs. You can apply on a company website, you can apply through a LinkedIn post, you can network out through a second connection on LinkedIn. It might be through a former manager, a former coworker, but type into the chat what percentage of jobs you think come through networking, because the numbers show, the results and the surveys show that no over half of jobs are typically found through networking. And this is where the strength of a job seeker with more experience comes in, is you have decades of experience in building relationships with others that you've worked with. And these are the times to tap into that network and rekindle those relationships. When you think about over the course of your career, you've likely had hundreds of coworkers over the course of the past few decades. And you've had folks where you've sat next to them every single day. You've had a cubicle next to them. You've had an office next to them. You may have worked with them, met their families, grown up with their families, had watched their children grow up. And now's the time to reconnect with those folks, because you never know where somebody has gone throughout their career. And you could have somebody who you worked with at a former employer and it was a colleague, and now they might have navigated to your next dream job, and they might have navigated to the next place that you want to go to, or they might know somebody. And so, definitely leverage these relationships. The other thing to keep in mind, we kicked off this session talking about your passion and your purpose and how that transfers. And if your passion or purpose, like Andrew's, is connecting with other people, understanding folks, telling stories, you can take a look at parallel jobs that can help you go into. But you can also take a look at jumping to the other side of the table. Now, what do I mean about jumping to the other side of the table? What I mean is, if you are in a role where you managed a vendor, maybe you might make a jump to actually go over onto the vendor side of things. If you are in a role where you supported a company, maybe there's an agency like a PR agency that was help working with that company, or a consultant, where you can reach out to somebody that you've worked with in the past. Um, all companies, many companies, B2B companies, have clients. Maybe it's time to rekindle and reconnect with somebody who used to be a client, and let them know that you've always looked up to their company and you've always were interested in their company, and now might be the time to make that jump as well. But these are the advantages that older job seekers have, and younger job seekers coming out of college will gain these experiences. But if you have these experiences, you should definitely leverage them in your job search.
It's great advice, and we have so many people giving their thoughts on the percentage, and we have Craig with 80%, Grace with 90, Andrea with 90, Edwin with 90, Morgan with 80, Johnny with 75%, and I saw a few below 50%. And then we also have some comments from Jasu. Every job I ever got was through networking, never through applying. Chris says a majority of all jobs I've secured any interviews with are only when I have a connection at the company already that can help pass along my resume. And so I think that was such fantastic advice. And thank you for putting the importance of networking more eloquently than I could. So I appreciate that. And, I think we have time for one more question. And this is one that I saw. I'm sorry, I'm losing the name of who asked it, but it's one that a lot of people do ask, which is, how do you get your resume through applicant tracking systems and to a person? I mean, I think this comes back a little bit to networking, but can you also explain a little bit about what applicant tracking systems are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that I started my career as a recruiting coordinator for a Fortune 100 company. And the applicant tracking system, sometimes known as an ATS, was literally what I lived in. It was a system that every day I'd go to work, I'd log into my email, and then the ATS or the applicant tracking system would be the second one. Think of it as an organization system for the employers to keep track of job seekers, to take notes about interactions when emails were sent, as well as where a job offer is in the process. Here's the unfortunate reality: it's a necessary evil. The applicant tracking system is the system that feeds your information into the other HR systems when you get hired. That's how you get paid. That's where your paycheck will end up coming from, is when you go through these flow systems. Where a lot of the talk is sometimes applying into an applicant tracking system or on a company career website feels like a black hole, where you're throwing your resume, you're throwing your application into this black hole. Here's some of the things that I learned from my career on the recruiter side of the table and when I was a hiring manager. For every corporate job posting that's out there, on average, it gets 250 resumes or applications. That's a lot of other people that are applying for that role as well. And of those people, about 20 to 30 are going to get a phone screen, and about 4 to 5 will go interview with a hiring manager or with an interview panel. And at the end of that, just one person's going to get hired. So we've talked about the importance of referrals and getting other eyeballs on your application. The biggest mistake that I see job seekers make is that they think that applying for jobs ends at the applicant tracking system. That's actually where the beginning of the process is. And if anything, you're networking and you're having these conversations, learning about the culture, learning about other people's journeys at that company, and then you're applying, which allows you to have an insider, somebody on inside the company who's advocating for you. And that doesn't necessarily even have to be the hiring manager or a recruiter. Most large companies all have an employee referral program where employees actually get an incentive. Sometimes even they get cash if they're able to go find great people who end up getting hired. So when you apply to an applicant tracking system, you should supplement that with other touch points and other ways of just making sure and just reminding somebody that your application is in there. And that is the best way to be able to get more eyeballs on your application. The other areas, just to be aware of, is keywords matter a lot, meaning that in the past, I've been a chief marketing officer of a California based tech company, and we had specific skills and specific software that we needed our marketers to know when they came in. And so, oftentimes in our applicant tracking system or on LinkedIn, we would do a search for the names of those tools or programming languages that we were looking for. And so, making sure that that matches what a company is looking for will also help make sure that you don't get filtered out as companies are looking through those on average 250 applications. And the way that you know what those keywords are, look at the job description and just make sure to tailor your resume to that job description.
Keywords were always one of my worst parts of the SAT, so it's always a nightmare for me.
You and me both.
And that question, I finally found who was from. Thanks to our producer Steven. That question was from Katie, so thank you, Katie. And
Thank you,
all
Kate.
of you who are watching, that was our last question, but a lot of the questions you're asking and adding to the stream have been answered earlier in the broadcast. So go to the link above in just a little bit, and you could rewatch and see the answers to a lot of those questions. And Vincent, thank you so much for your time. I got a lot out of this. I think our members got a lot out of this. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel humbled to be able to join you guys on Get Hired. And right now, more than ever, the community is coming together and we're seeing some of the best of humanity as well during these tough times. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Yes, and be sure to follow Vincent. We have his LinkedIn profile had been flashing throughout the broadcast. And to all of you out there, I just want to thank you again for joining us. We have these chats every Friday, now at 1:30 from the LinkedIn news page, and that's 1:30 Eastern time. And you could just watch here every Friday. And as I always like to remind you, Please keep safe, stay well. You can only get a job and you could only be a viable candidate if you're healthy and well enough to do so. So make sure that you are taking care of your mental health along with your physical health. So until next week, be sure to, check out Get Hired, the newsletter. And until then, take care and be well.